Hey everyone, this is Bill Krieger from the Veterans Archives podcast, where we preserve and share the incredible stories of our nation's heroes. Catch us every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern on Wreaths Across America Radio, or stream anytime on Buzzsprout, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Really, anywhere you choose to get your podcast, you should be able to find us. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and follow us on social media to help us reach more veterans and supporters. We are a nonprofit, and this service is completely free for veterans. Every story matters, and every voice deserves to be heard. Spread the word, honor our heroes, and join us on this mission. Follow, share, and tune in, because their story should never be forgotten. Learn more at veteransarchives.org. We'll see you there. Welcome to part one of our 5-part series with Don Roach, who served in the United States Marine Corps. Good morning. Today is Thursday, February 8th, 2025, and we're talking with Don Roach, who served in the United States Marine Corps. So good morning and welcome, Don.
Good morning, Bill.
So we're going to start out really simple. We're just going to talk about your childhood, and let's start out with when and where you were born.
Born in Detroit, February 49, and grew up on West Grand Boulevard in the Webb Music Studio. It was owned by my mother's older sister and her husband. They taught piano and organ. Uncle Reg was the primary instructor. He also worked for a couple of companies in Detroit, playing at theaters, playing organ for silent films and things like that, and other venues they had. He sold pianos for Smiley Brothers in West Grand. Mm-hmm. And in 1950, so I was a year old, I had just started to walk. We moved to a brand new VA housing subdivision in Oak Park, north of 9 Mile.
So was your father a veteran then?
Yes.
Okay.
Army Air Force.
Okay.
His entry into the war was delayed by his mother having an illness. And since my grandfather was the primary breadwinner in their household, he stayed behind to take care of my grandfather, mm-hmm. so my grandfather could continue working. And once she got better, he enlisted in the Army Air Force. His twin brother went in and became a B-25 pilot.
Oh.
They both aspired to flying. They built models and rubber bands and all kinds of stuff. You know, they were pilots growing up.
It was just in their blood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so Dad got into the war late. He was in flight training, and he had a leg injury playing football. Mm-hmm. He healed up from that. They put him back in flight training, amazingly, and they were sending him to college to boot. And he got up with an instructor flying an old PT-13 Stearman, and he could do anything the instructor wanted that involved use of the left rudder. The right rudder, not so much.
That leg got to him, huh?
It was just too much. He couldn't bear it. So the instructor had to. He liked them, but he had to wash them out because they were moving so many people per month through the program.
Right.
And they offered him bombardier navigator training, radar navigator training, mm-hmm. for B-29s. So he was in Texas when the war ended.
Oh.
Dropping sandbags all over Texas, you know.
Did he get good at it?
Interesting enough, he hated it. Mm-hmm. He wanted to be a pilot. So he was throwing the bags every which way. Well, he had made friends with a couple that he met in town. Mm-hmm. Turned out they were the people that edited the films for the Army Training Command. So they knew he was better than what they were seeing, so they edited the films to make him look good.
Oh, no.
So he kept going through the ranks and couldn't figure out why they weren't washing him out. Uh-huh. And finally, he told them one day, I can't figure it out. They won't let me out of this thing. He said, well, we've been trying to help you along. And he said, well, why didn't you say something? You know. So after that, he did what he's supposed to do, and he did really good. Uh-huh. And he got high marks, got his bombardier wings, And like I said, the war ended, so there was no place to go, fly B-29s.
Right.
So the Army offered him an easy out, and he took it. His twin brother, Bernard, had been flying B-29s or B-25s for a couple of years, and he flew them all over the western side of the United States. He was testing equipment.
Okay.
He was very scientifically adept, and his reports were right on, like to the 10th degree of this and that and the other. And so the Army kept him busy testing everything they could think of, and they let him go.
Mm-hmm.
He never flew again. He had enough.
Well, that's interesting because he grew up around wanting to fly, and then he actually flew, and then he was like, I'm done.
Well, from the B-25s, he was mostly deaf,
Okay.
and their ear protection was not real good.
Yeah.
And they used to speak through these throat mics, you know, and you had to speak forcefully to be able for the mic to pick it up. I bought one of those things years later, Army surplus, and tried it out with City Tower. And I asked him, what do I sound like? He says, sounds like you got a bunch of rags in your mouth. So I took that thing off, hung it on a wall.
Yeah. So your dad got out of the military then, like right at the end of the war?
Yeah.
And then came back to Michigan?
Came back to Michigan. My grandfather was in men's clothing.
Mm-hmm.
And before the fall of '29, he actually owned a men's clothing store in Gratiot. And it was suits and pants and vests and things, shirts and all kinds of haberdashery stuff, hats and whatever. And some of his biggest customers were the Purple Gang.
Oh.
They loved his store. So they were in all the time sprucing up. He didn't know who they were at the time, but that was just a Roach story that came along later.
Yeah.
And but at the crash of '29, he lost the business, had a close-up shop. Nobody was buying anything back then. He ended up selling shoes door to door.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always admired him for that he had enough tenacity to keep working at what he knew how to do best.
Yeah.
And that was clothing and fitting people, making them happy with the fit of whatever he was selling.
He probably got really good at just reading people.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
And understanding what it is they wanted.
I would have hired him in a heartbeat anywhere.
Yeah.
Anyway, my dad followed him into the clothing business.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point, they both worked for Fintex, which had stores at like Eastland Mall.
Mm-hmm.
And Fintex was bought up by Hughes Hatcher Suffren, became Hughes and Hatchers. And eventually, and my dad moved right along with that, eventually became a department manager. And he was really good at it. He knew how to, organize people and motivate. And he was such a quiet person. I mean, never a harsh word, never barked at anybody. And he just made people feel like they were responsible to not make him look bad.
Uh-huh.
So they would work hard for him. And that was a real gift.
Yeah.
And taught me a few things in life, And he eventually was hired by Jacobson's, became the men's store manager in Dearborn at the brand new store. He helped build the store and lay everything out, organize it. And years later, they had him go to other facilities they built and have him set those up. One of them was down in Ohio, and they allowed him to fly his own airplane down and pay him mileage to go down there and do that. And, he was in heaven when he could do that.
That's quite a deal.
He hadn't flown in many years, till after I got back from the Marine Corps.
Okay.
And I was in Vietnam 67 through 68.
Mm-hmm.
So I was there for the big Tet Offensive in 68. I mostly patrolled outside Da Nang.
So hold that thought, because I want to roll back a little bit.
Okay.
When did your mom and dad meet?
They met at a Halloween dance.
Uh-huh.
probably a year or two before they got married. Mom was a registered nurse. She had graduated from high school and went right into nurses training. That was what she wanted to do. And back then, nursing was not looked upon as a really good career.
Right.
I mean, you had to pick up after people and clean after them and everything else. So it was kind of a subservient position. A lot of people thought. They didn't realize how much technology went into everything else she was doing, the medicine, the temperatures, and things like that. And she did really well. She had training as both a psychiatric nurse and as a surgical nurse. So she was able to assist doctors in surgeries. Her sister Marge, who had co-owned the music studio, upon the death of her husband, or after the death of her husband, met a doctor, married him. He was a podiatrist, ex-Navy, and he tended to do minor surgeries right in the office. And at one point, he solicited my mother to assist him in the surgeries when she wasn't working or busy. My dad, being an amateur 8mm filmographer, was recruited to film the surgeries. Well, this was when I was about 12, 13 years old. So Dad was filming the surgeries, Mom was assisting. Dad would get the film developed, and the next job was to splice in name cards to film to insert into the developed reels.
Okay.
That became my job.
This is a family affair.
So here I am with, labeling supernumerary amputations of a sixth toe and bunionectomies on the right foot and all this stuff, and splicing it into the film. So I'd have to watch the films to know where to splice the film in.
Yeah.
And so I saw all kinds of firsthand surgeries, that my parents were involved and my uncle were involved in. And I guess that kind of immunized me against seeing traumatic things and getting upset about them. I never did.
Right. Yeah, that would definitely, it would desensitize you to that sort of thing.
I mean, that was 12, 13, so that was before high school.
Right. So when your parents got married, they had you, obviously. When you were one year old, you moved then from the Webb Music Studio. Where did you move to?
Oak Park, Michigan.
Okay.
We got a VA home loan. It was kind of a cookie cutter block. All the houses looked alike. And Oak Park had been a swamp and a dump prior to everything getting filled it and putting soil down and leveling it and putting houses in. As a kid, I used to like to dig in the backyard, and I'd find all kinds of treasures, broken beer bottles,
Right.
One time I actually found a wallet with a dime in it, and that was like a big treasure for me to incite me to keep digging. But it was a dump, and that's all that was in there.
Let's take a quick break.
Hey, listeners, we need your help to keep the Veterans Archives podcast going. We're a nonprofit dedicated to preserving the stories of our nation's heroes, and we provide this service completely free to veterans. Your support helps us record, share, and archive these incredible stories so future generations never forget the sacrifices made for our freedom. Every donation, big or small, makes a difference. Visit veteransarchives.org to contribute today. Help us honor their service by ensuring their voices are heard. And thank you for your support, and thank you to all the veterans who have served our country. And so you had 3 brothers and sisters. How many brothers and sisters?
2 brothers, 2 sisters.
Okay, so family of 5. And did they come along in pretty rapid succession?
Yeah, Doug came along when I was 3, Joan when I was 5, Carolyn when I was 7, and Thomas when I was 9.
Your family was very busy. That's a lot of kids in a very small age range.
Mom had a sister that had 8 kids. starting with a girl my age, Barbara. And Barbara and I we were at the music studio together, visiting. We would go to Aunt Marge's home when she lived further away, that kind of thing. And so if her mom was in labor or tied up otherwise,
right,
she'd get dumped with somebody, and usually it was with me and somebody else. So we palled around a lot. I grew up with her. Still get to see her every once in a while and go to lunch, that kind of thing. And she has a son and daughter. Her husband is deceased. He was a really nice guy. Amazingly, her husband was Greek Orthodox.
Oh.
The rest of us are all Roman Catholic. But I remember I attended their wedding ceremony, and it was unique.
Yes. Well, so a little background. I actually grew up in a couple of different churches, and ended up in the Catholic Church. But I got married to someone who's Greek Orthodox, and so we were married in the Greek Orthodox Church.
Yeah,
it's really different.
Oh, it's fascinating.
Yeah,
I've had a number of friends. They were actually Palestinian, and they were Greek Orthodox. And I've been to a number of baptisms and weddings and things like that with their families.
So you're almost honorary Greek Orthodox.
Yeah, almost.
So what was it like growing up during that time with brothers and sisters and cousins, and what was your childhood like?
Well, in the 1950s, a lot of things were coming along fast, like television and improved radio. I mean, I used to visit my grandfathers, and they both had big old hunky radios.
Yeah.
And they'd spin the dials, and I'd sit there in front of the thing listening, and they'd say, "Hear that?" And I'd hear static. I'd say, "That's Chicago."
It was a big deal too, right?
Yeah. Wow, we're hearing. I didn't even know where Chicago was, but I knew it wasn't local. So, and eventually they'd get a station or something. Usually a ball game. They both like ball games. I don't know why my dad really never paid much attention to sports, so it wasn't on at home. I really had no interest. I had been to a few ball games with my dad at Tiger Stadium because my grandfather wanted to go. So the two of us would join him and take him to a ball game, and he just loved sitting there firsthand. Normally he'd come over on a Sunday, drive himself, and he was one of the first people to get a transistor radio. And he'd plug that thing into his ear and just sit there for hours listening to, and he could memorize where everybody was on the field, what they looked like. He knew all the ball players by name. I think he had a whole bio on everybody.
Oh, I'll bet.
Memorized.
Yeah.
When he was a young man in his early teens, he got a job at a local Detroit railroad yard. His job was to sit up in a control cab way above the ground, like 2 stories up, and watch a fleet of trains come through, and then sit down and write down all the boxcar numbers. He could memorize them that fast.
Wow. So he had almost like a photographic memory.
I did not inherit it. It's much to my chagrin.
Yeah.
But he was brilliant in his way. He was always, that was my dad's dad. He was always figuring things out. And my other grandfather, my mom's dad, was an older gentleman, German. He had been brought over from Germany by his mother when he was a baby. She married a naturalized citizen, and she became a citizen, as well as he did. And so he grew up speaking German in the home. I don't know much about his education or anything, but he was a skilled craftsman with a micrometer. And he got a job with Chrysler Corporation measuring steel at stamping plants. So when they got steel shipments in for fenders or hoods or whatever, his job was to inspect the steel and make sure it was the grade that they wanted.
Okay.
And years later, we heard about that. We called him Grandpa Brand. That was his name. And years later, we heard about the sons and daughters, always amazed at how many people brought gifts to the house. Turkeys, hams. You know, I mean, food was expensive back then.
Yeah.
But they were always well fed. And a few years later, a few of us realized these were bribes.
Oh, really?
The people bringing the stuff over were the salesmen for the steel companies.
Oh, no.
Had to live that one down after a while, you know.
Right. So tell me a little bit about school and what it was like for you kind of growing up during your school years. I mean, I kind of get a sense that family was important and close
Sure.
in your family. And so I can only imagine that you like blazed the trail for your siblings when it came to school. So how did you do in school? What was that like for you?
Well, kindergarten was crazy. That was my only public school at the time. And I didn't really relate to a lot of the kids. Most of the guys were into sports and I didn't understand that at all. I said, a bunch of grown men playing ball. You know, how exciting can that be? You know.
Yeah.
I just didn't get it. And I was building my balsa airplanes and things like that. And when I wasn't building them, I was drawing them. And in kindergarten, my teachers went to a parent-teacher conference, and the teacher complained that, well, he's drawing airplanes all the time, and they're in perspective, but they're always red. He doesn't use other colors. So they had a talk with me.
They were concerned about this.
So they had a talk with me, and after that, I drew everything in black. It's like, yeah. So, and they were also in perspective, you know, like when you'd see a wing, it'd be trapezoidal, you know.
Right. It looked like you were looking down the wing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just drew what I saw going over in the air, you know. I didn't have any airplane books. I mean, not they were cartoon books, not real books.
Yeah.
And I was actually reading pretty good in kindergarten. I had been reading the comics for years in the paper, and if I didn't understand one, Mom or Dad would read it, and I'd follow them along, pointing at the words as they read them, and I learned to recognize the words. So I didn't understand much about construction of alphabet and that sort of thing, but I could recognize the patterns.
Right.
So I guess, like my grandfather's eidetic memory, I was using some form of that to make sense out of it. And after that, I could read newspapers and books and whatever. And I had a real fondness for reading. I loved finding things out. And first grade through eighth, I was in Our Lady of Fatima grade school, parochial school. First 3 years, first 2 years, the teachers were mostly nuns. After that, we got some ladies, civilian teachers, the third and fourth grade, that kind of thing.
So was parochial school like people say it? It is? Like
It was strict.
Yeah.
They didn't want kids clowning around in class. You were here to learn.
Right.
When the class is over, at the end of the day, you go home and do whatever you want. But when you're in school, slap that ruler on a table, you know.
Yeah.
I never saw anybody get hit with a ruler. I did watch a nun put a kid into a closet.
Really?
Well, we had these closets with sliding doors where they hung our coats. He was just being obnoxious. They shoved him in there, closed the door, and said, "We'll let you know when to come out." At the end of the class, they let him out.
Yeah. Yeah. You couldn't do that today.
No.
That's frowned upon.
But at least it didn't hit them.
Right, right.
They didn't want to scar them for life.
So when you got into grade school and middle school, you still had this affinity for airplanes then.
Oh yeah, I wanted to learn all about them.
Yeah.
And the more I studied, the more I learned how important education was regarding airplanes in order to design them, build them, balance them, that kind of thing. So I was an honor student all through eighth grade.
Okay.
Every month they had awards for every grade level, or every 3 months, I guess they graded us. And I'd get it on the honor roll, and it never meant anything to anybody. My parents actually expected it.
Uh-huh.
So I didn't think it was anything brilliant. But it was a small portion of the class that could do that month after month.
Right.
Or year after year. And in third grade, I remember I had a science teacher for the first time, and she offered extra credit if you do a presentation on a board and explain something to the class. I diagrammed the USS Washington, which was our first nuclear-powered missile submarine.
Okay.
And I explained how the reactor worked and the missile tubes, and the teacher was sitting there with her mouth open, like, where does he come up with this stuff? Like just, I mean, it was technology way behind anything she had ever learned.
Yeah.
And I just talked about it like it was no big thing. This is how this does it. This is what makes the boat dive and come back up, and
Oh my goodness.
And I got extra credit, but
Yeah.
and most of the class was pretty engulfed. At least the girls were. Half the guys were. Half of them got bored after a few minutes and said, I don't need to know about that.
Right. They're never going to use that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, that's still, yeah, they can do it now, but that's a dream,
Uh-huh.
Like, I'll never be in the Navy. Yeah, right. And, but that's the way my life went. I was always doing something way beyond what the class could do. And
Did you find yourself getting bored as a result of that? Or did you just...
no. In third grade, we actually had a day when they took us across the street to Oak Park Public Library and got us all library cards. Well, I went around that library and looked at it, and I thought, I'll never be bored again.
Uh-huh.
And from then on, I was taking out at least 2 books every week. And after the first year and a half, so about 5th grade, I'd read all the kids section books that I wanted. There was an author who wrote books about scuba diving called Leonard Wibberley. He also wrote The Man on the Moon, The Mouse on the Moon, that kind of thing,
Yeah.
Oh, it was The Mouse on the Moon, I'm sorry. And The Mouse That Roared, and you've probably seen the
I'm familiar with The Mouse
silly
That
movies.
Roared. Yep. Yep. I know what you're talking about.
where the town is the Grand Duchy of Fenwick,
Uh-huh.
that book. So anyway, I was really familiar with Leonard Wibberley. And then one day in 4th grade, I was over there on a weekend, and I wandered into the adult section. And the first book I spotted was The Wake of the Wahoo. The Wahoo was a World War II submarine,
Okay.
very successful, that went missing after 7 missions. We're on the 7th mission. So I got that book out. The book was written by a crewman who was aboard the sub the first 6 missions and then came down with appendicitis. His job was yeoman, which of course in the Navy is a clerk.
Right. So he knew all about all the people on that boat.
He memorized. I mean, he had the eidetic memory. He knew their ages, where they came from, who their parents were, their girlfriends, all the scuttlebutt that sailors have going back and forth.
Yes.
He knew everything, and he memorized, and he wrote this wonderful book. it's been a favorite of mine ever since.
So you still own that book, I assume.
Do.
Yes.
I've got a copy. And but the way I would do it is I couldn't take the book out because it's an adult section.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd have to sit there for 1 or 2 hours at a time and read it, and then go put the book back. Well, I never put it back where it belonged. I put it somewhere else.
You didn't want anybody to check it out?
So it would be there
Yeah.
the next Saturday when I got a chance to go back and pull it out and read more, all the way until I completed the book.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I started doing that in the adult section from then on. I'd take a book out, read what I could, hide it somewhere, get it up, Once in a while, they'd find it and put it back where it belongs, and I have to go look for it. But,
Yeah.
I don't think they really knew what was going on.
No, they probably just thought someone was just randomly putting books away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would try to disguise it. Like I'd put it in a book that was, between a bunch of them that looked similar in shape. It's like it accidentally fit in there.
Uh-huh.
And I guess that's where my conniving part came up. I turned out to be a pretty good conniver.
Okay.
And
did that last you all the way through school?
yeah, through life. So I graduated from 8th grade. I had a chance to go to Catholic Central and tour it, see the classrooms. Well, the classrooms had purple blackboards, which my eyes did not like the way the light hit.
Uh-huh.
And they used yellow chalk, which it was gaudy.
Yeah.
And I thought, I can't do 4 years of this. I'll go mad. Plus, it was all boys. It was segregated.
Oh, so no girls in...
No.
Oh, goodness.
Not at Catholic Central. Not at that time. I don't know about now. And I liked interacting with girls.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them were really smart, and I got along well with all of them. And, I'd meet a girl who was having problems, and I'd talk to her, walk her home, anything, just to help her straighten out whatever she was facing. And been doing that my whole life also.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I get that from my dad. My mom was a German girl. She was very cut and dry. Things either were one way or they were not.
Yeah.
And we had a whole mix of neighbors in our neighborhood, different ethnic backgrounds. The city was predominantly Jewish,
Mm-hmm.
and yet we only had one Jewish family on the block. And she liked them really well. But there were a couple of neighbors that she expected more from. Like, you've grown up, you're responsible, you've got jobs, you've got kids. Why are you acting like idiots,
Uh-huh.
Especially if alcohol was involved. Because back in the mid-50s, the cocktail became a noticeable item at parties.
Right.
And Mom and Dad didn't particularly drink. Dad, I don't think he ever really got to like beer.
Mm-hmm.
And Mom wouldn't drink anything else. I mean, she'd sip a beer, but never went anywhere with it. Us kids never had alcohol.
Yeah.
And I never wanted it. It was just not something they didn't do it in front of us. And we didn't, there was always a few bottles of something up in a kitchen closet somewhere.
Right.
But it was nothing we ever paid any attention to. We didn't know what it was.
This wasn't really important in your family.
Yeah.
Alcohol then at that point. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
So did you end up going to Catholic Central then, or
no?
Oh,
I went to
okay.
Ferndale High.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this question though. So you come from a Catholic family, and they were okay with you making the decision, I don't want to go to Catholic Central, I want to go to Ferndale High School, or was there a discussion that went on about that?
No, I think they were very happy because that way they didn't have to pay for it directly.
Oh, that's true.
Because Ferndale High was public,
Yeah.
and they already paid taxes. So after let's see, I think Catholic education through 8th grade was $50 a year per kid. And they had 5 kids when I graduated that school, so it was up to $250 a year.
Yeah.
And on a clothing man's salary, $50 was like a week's take home for a long time. How mom juggled all that, I don't know, because she did the shopping and looked for bargains and cut coupons and all that stuff.
Well, and that's a lot of mouths to feed on top of tuition, really.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Plus, we had to be dressed according to the school code.
Right.
That meant shirts and ties, slacks for the boys, proper-looking dresses for the girls, and there was never any overalls or anything like that, or blue jeans or anything. And so we were all dressed, like Sunday best, going to school.
Yeah. Yeah. So what was Ferndale High School like for you?
Ferndale was liberating.
Uh-huh.
It was I thought it was really a step to get no more kids and interact with more. My class had over 600 students, just my class.
Yeah, that's a lot of people.
And there were 4 classes. So it was a busy school, very big. The school was on 3 levels. It was laid out in the outline of a big square. So we had a courtyard and we had an auditorium at the head of the building, that kind of thing. And the dress codes were a lot more lax. You could wear blue jeans and Western shirts and, either snaps or buttons. They didn't care, as long as you were dressed properly, And
nobody was hitting any desks with any rulers or anything like that?
No. And classroom, what should I say, structure was different. In Our Lady of Fatima, we were always quiet, reserved, and allowed the teacher to speak. And we raised our hand if we had a question. We didn't talk amongst ourselves. We didn't pass, the girls were passing notes. The boys didn't really get into that kind of thing. But at Ferndale High, if somebody wanted to talk, they just turned around and talked. Even if there was something going on up front of the classroom, Well, they found out from me real quick, I didn't like being interrupted. I wanted to hear what the teacher had to say. And I had a hard time seeing the board. So I always tried to sit at the head of the row or somewhere close to it so I could read what's on the blackboard. And oftentimes, at the end of the class, I would go up and finish copying notes from the blackboard that I hadn't been able to read, hopefully before the teacher erases the whole thing for the next class. Finally got my eyes tested. They were bad.
Oh.
So the school called my parents and said, "You got to get this kid into an ophthalmologist now." It's a wonder he gets good marks when he can't read the board from, so many feet away.
Right. And yet you were doing all that reading early on.
Oh, yeah. I could read a book.
Yeah.
I just couldn't see anything far. So it turns out one of my results from that problem, one reason I didn't get into sports is I couldn't see anything. I thought everybody couldn't see anything. So I didn't understand the commotion. They were running around out in the field. I didn't know what they were doing.
Well, that would make it pretty boring if you couldn't see what was going on.
No, I just didn't understand it.
Yeah.
And yet my parents never picked up on that. My dad wore very thin glasses. My mom didn't have to. So my dad took me to his eye doctor. Guy was down on Woodward in Detroit, up a tall flight of stairs. It was the tallest staircase I ever went up in my life. And it didn't have any brakes. You just came in the front door and went up and up and up and up. Must have been 3 stories.
Wow.
And we get up there and he puts me in the chair and starts doing this or this or this or this. And I was amazed I could read all the letters after he did all the mechanics of the machine. And he wrote a prescription, and gave it to my dad, and says, "You get this filled today. Put the order in today. They'll mail you the glasses, but you get this done today, and I don't want to hear any excuses." So on the way home, driving up Woodward, we were below 6 Mile. We were coming up Woodward, and Palmer Park was on our left side.
Mm-hmm.
And Dad was driving. And of course, in those days, cars didn't have seat belts. You just sat in the seat.
Right.
So I'm sitting on the right side of the seat, the bench seat. My dad's driving. He says, "What's that sign say over there?" And I'd look around like, "What sign?" "That sign." I said, "What sign?" You know, and he thought I was being smart.
Yeah.
So he was getting mad. And he didn't say anything, but his face would start getting red, especially his ears would get red and his face would get red. Old Irish trait, you know?
Yeah. That's how you knew, right? That's how you knew that he was getting upset.
I'm the same way.
Oh, okay.
First thing that happens is my ears get red. They can spot me in the crowd from him. So anyway, he says, "What do you see over there?" And I was looking at the trees, so I said, "Green." And he said, "Green what?" And I said, "I don't know, trees." I mean, that's what trees were to me. They were just green.
Yeah.
I didn't know any better. I couldn't see branches or trunks.
So was it like that, like your whole memory of childhood? Like you just kind of saw the colors and the shapes, but you didn't really see what they looked like?
Yeah.
And no one knew it?
Yeah.
Wow, okay. So did your dad come to this realization as you were talking to him then?
Well, we got home and he had a discussion with Mom real quick.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, "We've got to start evidently interrogating the other kids."
Yeah.
Because we think this is systemic of a problem, you know. And turned out the other kids were mostly, well, my brother Doug, the next oldest, was worse than I was.
Uh-huh.
He could barely read a book. So he ended up getting the Coke bottle lenses. Joan didn't need much of anything. Carolyn didn't need anything. And at the time, Tom's eyes were fine. He could see everything. Though he did have one green eye and one brown eye.
Okay.
So I learned later that blue eyes tend to see better at night in the dark. And that was very useful in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
I could see when nobody else could. And since I was the point man, most of the time, like about 80% of the time, they had me out front.
Right.
I knew the lay of the land. I could watch out for things. And the others just followed along.
And they trusted you.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And they didn't like it when I wasn't there.
Right.
I mean,
right.
if they decided to move me and do something else with me, they'd all complain.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, "Well, we aren't going out. You know, we aren't doing that. Get Roach back on point, and we'll go anywhere you want," you know.
It's important. So tell me, I've got to ask, like when you got these glasses, what was that like for you?
I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
It was a whole new world opened up. And I was so amazed. I didn't have any worries about what I hadn't seen up to that point, but I was so amazed at what I could go learn from them on.
Yeah.
You know, like what I can see. And after reading about all these pilots having eagle eye vision and spotting fighter planes that were specks to everybody else, you know, miles away, I finally understood what they were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I started enjoying war movies and things like that more, because now I can, not only can I see everything going on in the background, I never did that before, but I can understand the stories behind the movies.
Was it a little overwhelming at first to be able to see all of those things?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like somebody pulled a fishbowl off my head.
Yeah. I can only imagine. So you get your new glasses. I'm assuming you made it through high school.
Yep.
And you graduated. What year did you graduate?
67.
Okay, so you graduated, and then what happened?
Well, prior to that,
Okay.
when I went to high school, I was 14, and I was going to turn 15 before the year ended. My birthday's in February. And I was looking forward to getting my driver's permit. Every kid back then was.
Yeah.
I mean, in Oak Park, we lived a mile from everything. We lived 2 miles from my high school. But I was a mile from the library. I was a mile from the pool, which was the city pool, which was right next door to the library. Later, they built an ice rink in that area. So church was a mile away. That was a little over a mile. So it meant, like, if you were going to functions, you didn't just walk across the street and enjoy it. You had to get on a bike and actually ride for 20 minutes or better
Right.
to get anywhere. And I had been exploring with my bicycle. I forget what age I was. My dad bought me a 24-inch English racer. Well, now I had a bike with gears that allowed me to travel long distances.
Without expending too much energy, right?
Yeah, it was one of the best gifts I ever got. And back then, parents didn't really worry about where you were. If you were home in time for dinner, or you were supposed to be in by 9 o'clock, you were. And they never asked where you've been.
Yeah.
So I'd get on the bike, and from Oak Park, I'd ride into Royal Oak. I'd cruise through Berkeley. I mean, I was miles from home. And this is before cell phones or anything like that,
Oh,
you know.
right.
And so I was exploring, and I was going to meet old friends that had moved away, spend the day with them, riding around doing stuff, and then ride all the way back home again. And I didn't think anything of it. And even though I wasn't going to get a family car, they couldn't afford they couldn't afford 2 cars as it was.
Right.
I wanted to get that level of appreciation and responsibility that I'd been working so hard for. So I was an honor student through 8th grade. I was the built-in babysitter, being the oldest of the family. So with both my parents working, I would get home from school ahead of the other kids, open the house up, welcome them home, make sure they changed their clothes out of what they were wearing, put on their play clothes, and then did their homework if they had some, that kind of thing. And I'd help them with it or entertain them and keep them busy until my parents would show up closer to making dinner and dinner time, that kind of thing. And my dad didn't always make it for dinner, being a manager for Jacobson's, that kind of thing. He would get delayed and have to work late and eventually come home. But he came home. He didn't go to the bar or anything.
Right.
I mean, he was very responsible. And that was the deal he had with my mom. And I think that worked out well for them in their marriage. They were married a long time. She outlived my dad by quite a few years.
Okay.
He died when he was just about to turn 70. She died at 94.
No, yeah, a few years.
And in the early 50s, she had cancer surgery. They did a mastectomy, tubectomy, lymphectomy. The doctor advised her being a nurse, she knew the doctor well, and he advised her, let's take everything out. Like, let's not have a reoccurrence.
Yeah.
So she became the oldest and longest lasting cancer survivor in the Detroit metro area. She was picked out of the bunch by Lila Lazarus on Channel 2, I think it was,
Oh.
for an interview
Uh-huh.
at one of the cancer runs in Detroit. We used as a family, us kids, we used to take her to these cancer runs and push her around in a wheelchair. And she'd meet people and talk to them and that kind of thing. And even living in a nursing home, she was always nursing.
Yeah.
You know, if she wasn't in her room, we'd go down the hallway and catch her giving a nurse at a computer station a shoulder massage. You know,
Always taking care of people.
always, it was her thing in life. And she says that's why she lived so long.
Uh-huh.
Because she was always busy. And she had gone to school with a bunch of girls. They all became nursing students together. And they were lifelong friends.
Mm-hmm.
So they would come and visit her, or we'd take her to visit them, that kind of thing. And eventually they started falling off. Mom was one of the last ones around.
Yeah.
And their stories were always so amazing. I love giving up time just to take her to go visit these people. One of her friends had been married to a friend of my dad. And he had been a B-26 bomber pilot in World War II.
Mm-hmm.
Brought back a whole bunch of pictures.
Oh, wow.
So he had pictures of their bombing raids and their missions departing the airfield, and she shared these with me. And I mean, I'm looking at things I have, you know, the like of which I had seen in photo albums in the library, but these were firsthand, my story kind of stuff, you know. It was amazing. The oddest thing he had was pictures of Mussolini after the war.
Oh.
He was hung,
Yeah.
and his wife was hung with him because she was part of the empire that he was trying to build.
Mm-hmm.
And there were pictures of the bodies being hung. There were pictures of Mussolini in a coffin and the atrocities some of the locals tried to do to him, throwing things on him and that kind of thing. And it really broke your heart to know that these people had suffered so tremendously through that war and that they actually saw the end of the war. And It was relief because the Allies came in and said, you're free. You don't have to do that anymore. So I learned a lesson from that. I thought, well, it took the Allies a long time, but every day meant something.
That's right.
Every effort they made, every human life it cost, ended up doing something good eventually.
Yeah, that's true.
And my mom had a brother who was in the war. He was in the Army supply, served in North Africa. He got out of the Army, came back to Detroit, tried working for a little while, couldn't get with it, and said, this isn't what I want to do. So he said goodbye. My mom's mom had died when she was 7.
Mm-hmm.
So her father raised herself, her sisters, and her brother, all as a single parent.
Yeah.
So he told his dad, he says, I'm going to leave. I know what I want to do. So he went down to Georgia and joined a monastery, became a monk. And after years of being a monk, he became a priest. And he was second to the abbot when he died. He was in charge of all the novitiates,
Yeah.
the beginners. And when he first started with the Monastery of the Holy Spirit, the monastery was cloistered, only men allowed. They didn't talk. They could sing praises and say mass, that kind of thing, but there was no conversation. And unless you were the abbot or somebody and you gave them orders to do something, they had a farm, so they had animals to care for. They baked bread. They started selling the bread.
Mm-hmm.
The locals started showing up buying honey and other things. They had a little store, and then they started selling books, and they even wrote books. Some of them he wrote some, and it got to be quite a facility,
Right.
and it was still quite cloistered, but now they could talk.
Mm-hmm.
They eliminated that rule, and they could have visitors. Some celebrity, I don't know what her name was or what she did, but she was some kind of celebrity, owned ranch type house
Mm-hmm.
down there in Georgia, adjoining their property, and she donated the whole thing to the monastery. So that became a spot for visitors to stay
Yeah.
when they were visiting one of the members. So after my service time and everything, I had purchased a 1978 Scirocco,
Uh-huh.
and I decided I was going to go visit this uncle that I'd been writing literature to since I was a little kid. And I thought, he's getting older. It's time I go down and meet this man. And I took my youngest sister with me, Carolyn. So Carolyn and I took off, drove down to Georgia, stayed one night on the road somewhere in a motel. And then we got to the monastery the next day, moved into the house,
Mm-hmm.
and she was not allowed to go through the facility, but she could visit him on the property with the house. And we could have him over for a meal. This was the only time of year they got to say, well, I would like steak and eggs, or I would like this, spaghetti, or things they didn't normally get because they ate minimal foods.
Mm-hmm.
So he was very happy to see us, happy to get a good meal. And I got to go through the facility. And here, all these years, even in Vietnam, I thought this little old man was stuck in Georgia, near Atlanta.
Yeah.
Conyers, Georgia. Turns out he was head of the department they had for stained glass. And I went through their facility. They had bin after bin of broken glass,
Mm-hmm.
all kinds of colors and shades of colors. Thank God they could see. And part of his job was when a church wanted a window made, he would fly to wherever that was, take measurements,
Mm-hmm.
come back to the monastery, draw the window on a piece of paper, big brown paper on the ground, and start laying out the outline for the stained glass they were going to do, whatever the scene would be. And most of them were religious,
Yeah.
but some of them were just pretty. And they would build this up from nothing, from drawings, then lead the glass into place.
Mm-hmm.
And presto changeo, they had a stained glass. Now they had to securely wrap it, and he had to go back and help install it, make sure it got installed so that it wouldn't shatter where it was.
Right.
And these windows had to stand up against storms and everything else because they were on the outside limits of the facilities.
Yeah. They were actual windows.
So there was a lot of engineering going into this subconsciously about making the leading thick enough
Yeah.
and structurally so that it wouldn't shift and fall in on itself. And I mean, what they were doing was like something out of, have you ever read the book about the pillars? It's an author that wrote about the church from early days in England when they were building these big cathedrals, and how they started getting the funding, and how they hired the craftsmen to build it. Pillars of the Earth, I think it was called. And I had read the book, and I could easily see how this worked in with all the masonry that they had done to build the monastery in Conyers. So I had a first-hand example of everything in that book. And that author wrote several more books like that. Very in-depth, time-consuming, very time-consuming books, but they told the story.
Right.
They told the entire story.
Yeah.
Not part of it, just the entire part, the whole thing. I watched that church in France going back up after the big fire, the cathedral. And I could just see all those craftsmen, just like that book, coming together to start reconstruction.
Right. Because it lasted for hundreds of years.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's got to last for another several hundred years. So, yeah.
Hopefully with better fire protection built in.
Yes, I hope so. I hope so. So let's go back then to graduation from high school. I kind of want to get to your time in service too, and how that all unfolded. So you graduated like right at the same time the war was really picking up, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Yeah, the Marines went to Vietnam in '65.
Yeah.
My company was one of the first companies there in Da Nang. And when they arrived in Da Nang, they were told to expect heavy resistance, communist automatic weapon fire, mortars, all that kind of stuff. So they go ashore in these boats, land on what was called Red Beach in Da Nang, and here are all these little girls with flowers and leis, putting them on their shoulders and welcoming them. They had a sign, welcome Americans, that kind of.
Right. It's a whole lot different.
So here you are with all these grunts, these combat-ready Marines, ready to do their thing, and there's nothing to do. It's like, we're going to have lunch.
Yeah. And we'll have the war later on. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. You know what?
Yeah.
I can get into this. This will work. And so they turned out to be a bunch of laid-back guys. And so they were very happily received. They were happy to be there. There was trouble later on, but
Right.
the communists were keeping their distance at that point. The one story I heard, some battles veteran laid out bunkers at Da Nang Air Base on the inland side facing the terrain. So they had all these bunkers laid out. They had like 6 bunkers. And these were designed to be machine gun emplacements. Of course, the communists weren't sure what they were building. So, along about 5:30, 6 o'clock one evening, the first Marines go out to the bunkers, one each. And along comes a junior grade lieutenant, decides to inspect the lines. So he goes out there and takes notes. Every bunker has one man in it. He's got an M14, that was the rifle they had. And they're all by themselves. He comes back in, goes to the corporal of the guard and says, "What's the story?" The corporal of the guard says, "Well, we're going to be putting M60s out there, machine guns, but we don't want the communists to know which bunkers have the M60s, so we don't do it until after dark." So the lieutenant says, "Good thinking." So it gets dark, the M60s go out with the gunners. Half hour later, the lieutenant inspects the lines again. So now each bunker's got 2 men, one with an M14, one with an M60, no ammunition.
Right.
He thought that was a little odd, so he went back to the corporal of the guard and be like, "What's the story?" So the corporal of the guard says, "Well, sir," he says, "the orders are each bunker gets a 1 M60. So we send one out. He says, "Where's the ammunition for the M60? He says, "Well, they don't really need it." He says, "What do you mean by that?" He says, "Well, the M60s don't have any firing pins. We didn't get them." So
Oh, no.
they're carrying these guns around, which are not really light.
Right.
They're humping these things out at dark to be secretive. And of course, every bunker was going to have one.
Yeah.
It wasn't just one or the other. and they've got no way to fire them. You could load them all day long, and it's not going to come out the other end.
Well, he was just following orders, right? Every bunker had to have an M60.
Well, that's what Marines do. Marines
Ah.
follow orders.
Yep.
And then, another hour later, 2 more guys per bunker would go out.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd have 3 men, maybe 4. And, well, fortunately, that lieutenant was smart enough to raise a ruckus.
Mm-hmm.
He could not believe that the upper command was ordering Marines to defend an air base with just rifles. What's the point? They drag these things out. Now they're responsible for them. They got to bring them back.
Right.
Can't just leave them there. Can't let the enemy get them. So they got their firing pins. It's like 2 weeks late, but
Yeah, at least they got them.
after that everything changed.
Yeah. So, Don, tell me, how did you end up in the Marine Corps? Let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, I never got the driver's permit that I was looking forward to.
Right.
I was, let's say, brokenhearted.
Mm-hmm.
Every idiot on the block, boy or girl, at 15, went to driver's ed, graduated, and got a permit.
Yeah.
Didn't matter if you had a car or not, you had the permit. You were considered responsible. I'd been an honor student. I'd been tutoring my brothers and sisters. I've been tutoring kids in high school. I've been doing extra credit things a lot. I was hoping to go to college and become a flight officer somewhere.
Right.
And I didn't know anything about Naval Academy, Air Force Academy, any of that stuff. And talking to senators, getting appointments, and that was all beyond me. I didn't know anything about that. My school counselor I considered him a rabbit.
Mm-hmm.
He was taking up space, and that was about it. When I first started high school, I went in as, came from Catholic education, which was advanced.
Yeah.
And I was an honor student on top of that. He put me in general math and general English, even though I was on an academic program.
Mm-hmm.
So he screwed up. I went through general English and general math sitting there feeling like an idiot. I was looking at stuff I learned in 3rd grade.
Yeah.
I was bored out of my mind. I was looking out the windows. I was doing other things, other homework, whatever. I got passing marks, but I didn't try to excel.
Yeah.
There was no point. It was too stupid. The reading material was substandard. My own reading material was way over what they had.
Mm-hmm.
My vocabulary was way over what they had. And I didn't realize the difference. I didn't know any kids that had other classes to ask me, what are you doing over there?
Right.
You should be in my class,
Right.
Well, that summer I met some of those kids and I figured it out. I told my parents, I said, I don't think this school is going to work out for me. So my dad went to have a meeting with the counselor.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know how heated that got, but he straightened that guy out. And the next year I started advanced English and advanced math. Only now I was a year behind.
Yeah.
So I had to spend half the year catching up to where I was supposed to have been when I started the class. And I was lucky if I could finish the class with passing anything better than passing grades. And again, my parents were saying no to driver's training. I was very broken up.
Mm-hmm.
And I assured them I would pay for whatever extra insurance there was or anything else. So I can get a summer job and do that,
Yeah.
So it came down to one of those things where, well, if I can't drive, I'm not going to work.
Fair enough.
I won't get a job.
Yeah.
I never did. I worked for other people that had jobs. I made more money than they did on the side,
Uh-huh.
like a newspaper boy. He had to worry about collections in order to pay his bill and have profit left over and whatever tips.
Yeah.
I worked with him. I worked twice as hard to make sure every paper got delivered precisely where the subscriber wanted it. If they came to the door, I thanked them politely, wished them a good day, and took off.
Mm-hmm.
We were both riding bikes, so I'd be on one side of the street, he'd be on the other, that kind of thing. But I got paid a flat $3 a week, no matter what. If you wanted my help, that's what, and I gave him all the tips.
Uh-huh.
You can have all the tips. I want a flat $3 a week, and that's all I want. Well, I did that with 2 or 3 guys, so I was ending up with $9 a week. Some of them, if they're really good and they had good tips, they'd make 6. And I had no responsibility.
Right.
So after about a couple of years of that, they all figured it out. We'd be better off helping each other than hiring this kid. You know? So I lost my job.
Oh, no.
But I was still washing windows, cutting lawns, snow shoveling. You know, I mean, I was ambitious. And during the summer, I started running fairs, F-A-I-R-S,
Uh-huh.
for the little kids in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Our backyard was the collection point of the neighborhood. My dad built toys for us.
Mm-hmm.
He built a wooden Jeep. No wheels, but it had seats, it was painted yellow, and it had wheel wells painted to the ground that were blue. And you could sit in this Jeep like this and go anywhere.
Oh.
We had a swing set, we had a slide, and we had a horse. It was a tree trunk my dad had saved from a tree an oak tree they cut down in our yard. He sawed off the branch, smoothed it down with sandpaper, made the neck, put some legs on it with 2x4s, bolted them on, staked it into the ground, and that was my horse.
And it doesn't.
Or anybody else's horse. We didn't
And it
care,
doesn't have to eat.
you know.
Yeah.
And then we had a teeter-totter. This thing had a wingspan about the size of a Boeing. You could put 8 kids on either end.
Uh-huh.
Or you could have 1 or 2, or you could sit in the middle and fly an airplane.
Yeah.
Whatever you want to do. So our backyard was imagination and fun.
Mm-hmm.
And I developed games that little kids could play. Things where they could win prizes.
Right.
And I'd make prizes like I'd spend the morning taking the chairs, the old chairs, I had wood spindles in them. I'd cut the spindles out, saw them off, shape them into baseball bats, and put them on cords so they could win a baseball bat.
Oh,
a little one they could hold.
Right. Yeah.
And they love those things. They went crazy over that stuff. And my mom would help me make lemonade. We'd serve lemonade. And the only rule was no diapers.
Uh-huh.
We didn't take kids in diapers. They had to be wearing pants. Because I wasn't going to clean up any messes.
I don't blame you. I don't blame you at all.
And it only cost a penny to get in.
Mm-hmm.
I used that for sugar and lemons for the lemonade.
Right.
Because I knew Mom couldn't just waste money on that. But yeah, so I'd charge a penny a kid, and sometimes they could even win a nickel in a prize. You know, I'd have a prize bag with little collectible things that I saved from everything from candy corn to we got Cracker Jacks.
Uh-huh.
Those little treasures, I'd have the little treasures there, and put them in a little bag. And the best thing was I got rid of all my junk. It all went out that way.
Yeah.
It was in the neighborhood. I didn't have to throw anything out.
That's good.
I didn't have to pack it up again.
Yeah.
And so I get my brothers and sisters involved, and some of them did it really good. Some of them didn't like it much. But it was something to do. Kept kids busy.
Yeah.
And out of trouble, off the street. And they learned how to play with each other. So when they got to go to the playground at the end of the block, in kindergarten above, they were good.
Mm-hmm.
They took turns. They tried different things with each other. And I figured I was paying it forward, just doing it that way.
Yeah.
So anyway, I went through high school. I went through 3 years, still wasn't driving.
Mm-hmm.
My neighbors were driving. The ones on both sides of me were driving.
Right.
The ones across the street were driving.
All your friends were driving.
That was the only time I really felt left out completely.
Uh-huh.
I didn't hang out with them anymore. They talked about things they were doing or going to be doing, and they just left me out of it.
Yeah.
Because nobody wanted to be part of something you couldn't share in. I mean, it's one thing if you physically couldn't afford a car or whatever, they understood that. But if you couldn't drive, that means you weren't responsible. And if you were a responsible person, what message did that, if your parents didn't think you were responsible, what message did that send to the other parents?
Yeah.
So girls didn't want to be around you. A lot of boys didn't want to be around you. It wasn't that you couldn't do it. Well, it was that you couldn't do it. It wasn't that you didn't have transportation. It was that even if you did, you couldn't join in and take some of the load. So one afternoon, my dad's dad was still alive, and he was driving. He'd been driving his whole life. Grandpa Roach came over for a Sunday visit, had Sunday dinner. We had a barbecue outside. It was a warm day. And this was after the winter. Mm-hmm. So this was like April, May, right in there. And he and I and my dad were sitting out in the backyard after the rest of the family had gone in the house. Mom was getting the kids ready for bed. And I was old enough at 17 to stay up with the gentleman,
Yeah.
So you think of the old parlor days when every old guy sat around smoking, or drinking
brandy and smoking cigars. Yeah.
Like in the cowboy movies.
Yeah.
So I'm out back with grandfather and dad. And my grandfather made a deal with all his kids when they were young. Mm-hmm. He says, when you have kids, grandma and grandpa will never interfere. You'll share in their growth. We'll throw parties for them. We'll give them gifts. But we are not going to tell them how to behave or what to do. That's your job.
Right.
We raised our kids. You raise yours. That was the rule. Finally, grandfather couldn't stand it any longer. I was the only grandchild that took the time on a weekend to jump on a bus, go down to Detroit, and then ride it out Jefferson to where he lived, mm-hmm. and go visit him. He and grandma.
Yeah.
I was the only one.
So you were a responsible guy. You were a good grandchild. You were a good son. Still no car.
I remember the first time I did it. Mm-hmm. He called my dad at work. Says, do you know where your oldest boy is? And Dad says, no.
Uh-huh.
He says, well, he's here. Dad says, what's he doing there? He says, he came to visit. Like, how come nobody else has done that? He says, he plans to go home on the bus. Are you going to let that happen? Meaning, like, you're not going to let that happen. Dad says, no. He says, good. So sure enough, Dad had to leave work in Dearborn, drive all the way out to the east side of Detroit, pick me up, and drive me back to Oak Park. And I didn't know why I was there. I thought, I'm fine. I can take the bus. I didn't know anything about riding a bus at night. It didn't bother me. I mean, the bus only goes so far in one direction each time, so
right.
you can't miss it. And I had to walk from Oak Park to Woodward, a little over a mile, to get the bus to go into Detroit. So I'd already walked a mile by the time I got on the bus.
Oh, yeah.
So Grandpa led into Dad. He says, well, first he turned to me and he says, so when are you going to be able to drive me home? And I looked at him like, where did this come from? And I just kind of, and I was already set on doing it myself.
Yeah.
Like, I'll graduate high school, go and get a license, I'll do whatever I'm going to do. I'll do it on my time. So I was through asking my parents for anything.
Yeah.
And so grandfather's asking me, like, when are you going to be able to, and I'm kind of like trying to signal him, like, don't bring that subject up. We don't want to talk about that here now. Because he hadn't spoken about this to me previously. And I said, well, I'm thinking I'm going to do it next year. And he lit into my dad. What the hell's wrong with you? Like, this kid's never been in trouble. He's an honor student. He's been doing this and this and this, you know. And I mean, he gave my dad the third degree like I'd never heard of. He wasn't violent. He didn't use foul language. But the English he used just desecrated my dad. Just took him down to the wick. So now my dad, being a typical Irishman, ears are red, face is red. I know the signs.
Yeah.
I wish I was behind a tree somewhere. He listens to me and he says, when are they going to have the enrollment for driver's ed this year? And I said, 2 months ago. And of course, he's having trouble containing himself. He can't believe he's hearing this.
Right.
I mean, grandfather's accusing him of not being aware, and now he finds out he wasn't even aware that they'd already done this 2 months previously. And he followed up with a magic question. Do you know who runs that program? I said, yeah, it was my old typing teacher runs it. What's his name? And I told him, he says, go get a phone book. So I got the phone book, found the teacher's name. Dad says, call him. Get signed up. So I called the teacher. I told him who I was. He says, I remember you, Don. What do you need? I was the only boy in the typing class.
Yeah.
And I was studious and worked hard. So he liked me out, you know, tremendous amount. And I told him, I said, well, at the time I couldn't enroll for driver's training, but if possible, I'd like to enroll now. And he says, you want mornings or afternoons? So I told him, and he says, hey, come on by. We'll get you started right away, and you can take a form home for your parents to sign. So I went out and told Dad and Grandfather I was enrolled. And so that's how I got my license in my senior year.
Finally.
And not only that, much to my surprise, once I got my license, Grandfather did want me to drive him home after our Sunday dinner. And he said, you can keep the car for a week. Well, why don't you pick me up next Saturday? I got to go to your other uncle's house. You can drive me over there. And after that, I'll, drive me back here and I'll go home. So I ended up being Grandpa's shuttle driver. And I was seeing aunts and uncles that I usually would see maybe once a year. I was seeing them more often, and more of a real family setting. And because Grandpa just over there for dinner, well, I'd join them, so I'd have dinner too, play with their kids, my cousins. And so I was the only one in my family that really spent time with other aunts and uncles on that side of the family, not my mom's sisters, and played with their kids. So I knew their kids the way my brothers and sisters never did.
Right.
And so it was a really good thing for me. And by this time, Grandma had passed too.
Mm-hmm.
So it was good company for grandfather.
Right. Yeah.
So he and I explored Detroit. He showed me things. He showed me walls down on Atwater, old factories that had bullet holes in the side where the Purple Gang took Al Capone's liquor shipment. And
Yeah.
things like, I mean, I saw things in Detroit. They should have made a tour out of, you know. And so I learned a lot of history at that time, you know, how people behaved and what they did.
Yeah.
And I was very glad my grandfather survived all that stuff. He wasn't really part of it, but
Right. He
knew
was
all
kind of
about
on the fringe. He knew all
Yeah.
about it. Yeah. Yeah.
so yeah, it was interesting. The in the 50s, we did go to family picnics. We went to parks along Jefferson and, well, along the riverfront.
Mm-hmm.
And we went to Belle Isle a lot. And that was really unique because I got to see some of old Detroit still there,
Right.
still going on.
Right.
And I learned that I love the water. I especially like seeing boats go by, any kind of boats, didn't matter. Mostly I like the big boats, the freighters. And I thought, boy, someday it'd be great to live along the river and be able to watch these silent queens just glide by, you know. Maybe honk their horns once in a while when they pass somebody.
That sounds really nice. Yeah.
One of my favorite places is Marine City. My best friends lived up there. And for a lot of years, I used to go up there for dinners and things and sit right along the river watching those boats.
Yeah.
You know, it was really wonderful.
Yeah, there's something relaxing about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they had a ferry there, international ferry, went to Canada and back,
Uh-huh.
until the Canadian side got wiped out in an ice flow. And they haven't been able to rebuild it since. They don't have the money.
Yeah.
And so they had to close the U.S. side and the border, crossing border guards, because there was no border there anymore without the ferry. So I guess the Canadians have to go up to the Blue Water Bridge or down to Jefferson from then on.
Yeah, not a lot of different choices for all of that.
No.
All right. Well, I would like to kind of get to graduation from high school. And
Okay.
let's talk about how you came into the Marine Corps and maybe talk a bit about what that was like for you.
Well, I knew there was no money in my family for college.
Yeah.
They'd be lucky if they could keep up with the increasing costs with the other four kids.
Right.
Doctor bills and car bills and other things. And up to that time, we'd always had really old used cars.
Mm-hmm.
The one I remember first was a 51 Dodge. It leaked air in the back seat when you sat on the seat.
Yeah.
Because there were holes in the floor behind it, you know. And my dad got rid of that. We went up to a 54 Chevy. Big orange car. My mom hated it. But it drove good and it ran good.
Right.
So that was our family car for years. He tried a 67 Impala wagon, V8. I think that was his first V8. And very quick car. Keep up with anything on the road. Outrun a few of them.
Mm-hmm.
But comfortable family kind of car. I never knew why he sold it. There was something about it that was going to cost money, and he decided it'd be better to upgrade the car than do that.
Right.
His youngest brother was a Chevy salesman in Detroit, Uncle Jim. Jim was an ex-Coast Guardman. He was too young for World War II. Jim was a good car salesman. He told my dad, well, I'll keep an eye for a recent trade-in. a car I'm familiar with, and let you know. One day he called me, he says, I've got a 67 Impala. It's priced right. So Dad went down and bought it. It's kind of a sandy gold fastback. Most modern car my dad ever had, modern looking car.
Yeah.
And had 4-season air conditioning. And I mean, I had helped my dad rebuild engines in the driveway, that kind of thing. I'd hand him tools.
Yeah.
And I learned about rockers and rocker panels and all that kind of stuff right there firsthand. But I mean, we didn't have heavy duty tools. We had simple mechanic tools. And anything complicated had to go to a shop.
Yeah.
But Dad would nurse these old cars along, and I'd help him do it. Some days I came up with innovation ideas, like, well, that's the way it's supposed to go, but this would work if we put a hanger here and do this, and
Yeah.
oh yeah, let's do that. And, we get another 5,000 miles out of this car this way.
Make it just a little bit better.
Maybe we have to rebuild it again, but at least we know how.
Yeah.
So Mom never knew how terrible some of these cars really were. But as long as they started, she was happy.
Yeah.
Anyway, he got a nice 67 Impala. It was his first really nice car in a long time. And that's the car I actually had a license to drive, my first one.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't allowed to use the car, but at least I had the license.
Right.
So one Sunday morning, I got up. I was 18. I got up real early. I decided I was going to go for a drive. I knew the family routine for the day. Dad was a member of the Ushers Club. He had 12 o'clock Mass. They should be leaving 11:30.
Mm-hmm.
Dad never did. If he left before 10 to 12, that was a miracle. That was the only thing he ever ran late for in his whole life.
Uh-huh.
He was always on time for work, for flying, a flight class, a training, anything. You name it, he was there waiting and ready to go. Church, not so much.
Yeah.
And I mean, at 1:45, we'd see him standing there in his underwear shaving. Mom's running around getting kids dialed up and all this stuff. And Dad's playing games.
Yeah.
So I took the family car for a ride. Went out in the country, went down a freeway, a highway. I just generally had a good time. The car was beautiful to drive, quiet, had a radio, that worked. I think it was AM, FM.
Mm-hmm.
So for the first time, I could actually play music I liked.
Nice.
I didn't put it on the buttons, but I dialed it in.
Yeah.
So I'm driving around, keeping an eye on the time. I come back home, and I walk in the house. Mom is ready for church.
Mm-hmm.
She says, "Your father wants a word with you." Well, that was her way of saying, you've stepped in it this time.
You're in trouble.
Yeah. You're in deep sneakers.
Right.
That's the way we used to call it. So I went to the bathroom door and knocked. Like I said, he's been there in his underwear shaving. Well, it's about time. This is at 11:45. He's nowhere near ready
Right.
to get behind the wheel of a car. And I sat down on the commode to listen to the lecture.
Mm-hmm.
That was not very responsible. And I thought, I wasn't told anything different.
Yeah.
He says, what if we would have had an emergency? And I looked at him, I said, that's what your neighbors are for. How many times have you driven their kids to hospitals and,
Yeah.
picked them up somewhere or something like that? They said, all of them owe you rides way beyond description. You know, you and Mom both, you know. It says, not to mention the police department is also our fire department, and they also do it EMS type response. So anyway, I took the wind out of his sails. Then he lets me off on with the big one. That car didn't have much gas when I parked it. You know, what happens now if we run out? And I looked him right in the eye and I said, I filled the tank on the way back. You're all set. Well, that really did it. It took all the steam out of his sails.
He wanted to be mad.
He wanted to be mad,
Right.
But he was so proud of what I did, he couldn't be mad. Like, now he had a story to tell, but he couldn't use it against me. To get out of here, you know. So I went out and waited in the car, and sure enough, about 12 and a half minutes later, he showed up. He put him, I mean, the guy works in suits, so he could put a suit on and look immaculate in a minute.
Yeah.
He knew how to tie a tie and tuck a shirt in. And he designed custom clothes for many patrons of Jacobson's, including ball players and other celebrities, people I never heard of. The only one was Denny McLean. He did a bunch of suits for Denny and delivered them to Denny's house. Says, I never saw a man with so many telephones on a coffee table in my life.
That's funny.
And but anyway, so I got away with it. And he asked me not to do it again. He says, please just don't take the car without permission. Just say something.
Yeah.
And if we can let you go, we'll let you go. And I said, okay, but I never asked again.
Right.
I got it on my system. And they were definite about no motor scooters or motorcycles. Definitely not in this house.
Yeah.
Well, one evening, my mom and dad were going somewhere. There had been a motorcycle accident. They responded. Mom was on the scene as a nurse, you know, trying to help this poor guy that got splattered. Idiot wasn't wearing a helmet. So it was a cranial injury, and it scared the heck out of them. They said, yeah, that could be one of our kids.
Yeah.
We gotta make sure they don't ride these things. So that was their word. No, don't do it. So anyway, one afternoon, I guess I did do it one time. I asked them for use of the car on a Saturday morning. Didn't tell them why. They assumed I was going to a friend's house 2 blocks away. That's where I usually went.
Yeah.
So I borrowed the car. I drove into Royal Oak to the recruiting office, which also had the selective service office. And the draft had started for Vietnam. I walked in the office. Selective service was there. All the doors for the armed forces were locked. I tried the Air Force. They were locked. Tried the Army. Thought maybe I could be a helicopter pilot or something. They were locked. And I knew I couldn't fly for the Air Force unless I had college. So I decided I was going to go in the service to get college. So I knocked on the Marine. I went into the Marine Corps office. That was open. There were 2 people in there, both dressed like janitors. One was asleep on the desk with a broom in his hand. The other was leaning out the window, second floor office, trying to get a date for lunch with some girl on the sidewalk. He was laying out a spiel, you know.
Yeah.
I couldn't hear her in, but oh, come on, this and that, and the other. And I looked at him like, oh, good luck with that guy. You're a janitor and trying to date a girl, you know, building away.
Oh yeah.
What does that look like? Anyway, I turned around, started to walk out, and the motion caught the eye of the guy on the windowsill, and he looked at me and says, "What do you need, sir?" Well, with that, the guy in the desk rolled onto the floor. And I said, I was just looking for the Marine recruiters. And the other guy jumps up and he says, that's us. We're them. And I thought, hey, this is my kind of outfit. I mean, if they can relax on the job like this, can't be that bad.
Yeah.
So let's talk. So I sat down with them, and the first thing I did was lay out my plan.
Mm-hmm.
I said, for every year in the service, I get a year of college. That's true. I said, I want to come in for 4 years, but I want 4 years of college guaranteed that I get out. No problem. So that was the only demand I had.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to go to special training or something like, their typical kinds of requests,
Right.
Like some kid took auto shop, so he wanted to be a mechanic, on anything. He didn't care. He just wanted to be trained as a mechanic. I took things like mechanical drawing and advanced math. I didn't even understand how that would work with the Marine Corps. And I had one uncle who was a Marine, served in the islands. He was briefly in the islands.
Mm-hmm.
He ended up being the head crew chief of an F-4U Corsair fighter squadron stationed in China.
Oh.
They flew from China to fight the Japanese. I never even heard of it.
No.
But when he came home, he brought all kinds of interesting Chinese stuff, pewter mugs, and I mean, that's all he did on his free time was haggle and trade and buy stuff.
Go shopping.
Send it home. And he had been an orphan.
Mm-hmm.
He grew up as an orphan, Catholic school, and he and I got along real well, especially after I was a Marine.
Right.
So all the men in my family had been in the armed forces during World War II. The only one too young joined the Coast Guard afterwards, in the 50s. So it was just after Korea and before anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And he was decorated for being on duty one night in the Chicago harbor and caught a fire going aboard a freighter. And raised the alarm, and they managed to secure the freighter and put the fire out. So that was pretty risky.
Yeah.
He could have been burned up alive in that one deal. But
so you end up with these two janitors.
So I'm talking to the two janitors, and we talk about what's going on like right now, and well, you'll most likely go to Camp Pendleton for training, and you'll go to Vietnam from there.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll do at least one tour. Doesn't mean you won't do 2 in 4 years.
Right.
But you'll do at least one tour, and the tour is 13 months. Everybody else does 12, but the Marines do 13.
Yes.
Don't know why.
Because they're Marines.
Yeah. we can talk them into it. So I go back home with the car. Don't say a word to anybody. And the Marines have said, well, you're old enough to sign your own enlistment, but the Corps would really appreciate getting your parents' signatures.
Mm-hmm.
So like they couldn't say they didn't know or try
Cause
to back
problems
you out
later on or whatever, right? Yeah.
Yeah, they thought ahead of that.
Yeah.
So we'd like to come over and get your parents' signature. I said, yeah, they're both home today, oddly enough. So if you come over after lunch, should work out okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'll try to keep them there if they wanted to talk about doing something. Okay. So they're assuming I've got their permission.
Right.
My parents assumed I went and visited a friend and came home. There's a lot of assuming going on.
So nobody really knows what's going on.
So
here.
there's a knock at the door. My mom opens the door,
Mm-hmm.
and she's very familiar with uniforms.
Yeah.
2 Marines in dress blues, and they're both sergeants. And I didn't even know what the ranks were. They're both sergeants. And Mom thinks it's a death notice.
Right.
Says, I think you got the wrong door. And one sergeant looks at his clipboard and says, Don Roach, 8th Gun, Oak Park? And she nods her head and says, may we come in? Sure. So she opens the door. My dad's at the table. 2 Marines in dress blues walking with the hats and everything.
Oh, yeah.
Don, you might want to be out here. So I come out and greet them. How you doing, Sergeant? Shake their hands. Well, the reason we're here, and they finally realize my parents have no idea what's going on.
Right.
They're looking at me like, nice play, kid. The reason we're here is Don was over to see us this morning and he enlisted for 4 years. My dad, who has never been at a loss for a word, sat there for 10 minutes just mouthing, 4 years? 4? I mean, just kept saying it over and over like he was trying to understand it. And then they explained, he was insistent that he get 4 years of college, and with 4-year enlistment, we can guarantee that. So the realization of my dad's mind was, oh, he did this to get 4 years of college. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I'm okay with that. So my mom asked, what are the chances he'll be in Vietnam? And this was like March of '67. It was a month after my birth.
Yeah.
And they're both excited. Oh, he'll be there by January.
Oh, goodness.
And she's looking at them like, you're sending my boy to Vietnam by January? Yeah. Like he's going to be trained and everything ready to go. So I went over as a January replacement. I actually got there in early December 1967.
Mm-hmm.
So the first place, well, after training, they gave us a 20-day leave.
Yeah.
We came home, went back. I went back a day early because I didn't want to be late, and I was flying standby and to save money.
Mm-hmm.
So I went back a day early, met up with another Marine I knew at the bus depot, talked to him. Turned out he was going to be stuck in town because they lost his luggage.
Oh, geez.
And since he didn't have an address yet, they were going to send it to the bus depot.
Yeah.
So he had to wait for his name was Washington. He was from somewhere down south. He was a nice black man, very tall, about 6'5".
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, how are you going to duck being that tall?
Yeah.
You're not going to fit into anything.
What was it like for you when you first got to boot camp?
I had seen some early war films where boot camp was depicted. I heard a few stories from my uncle about Quonset huts, things, and I knew what a Quonset hut was. I didn't realize they still had them, but
Right.
in 1967, But sure enough, we ended up in Quonset huts at MCRD San Diego.
Uh-huh.
Well, I don't know what the recruiters put on my files, but when I reported for duty down at Fort Wayne, the distribution center in Detroit, they gave me an envelope with the files for 16 other Marines in it and told me my orders were to take these 16 Marines to San Diego.
Okay.
Yes, Sergeant, I'll do that. I can do that. How do we get to the airport?
Right.
Where do we go? So I've got 16 other Marines. 5 of them were draftees. The other 3 were enlistees. And of course, the Marine Corps would never make a differential about draftees.
No.
At least not then.
Right.
And I didn't care one way or another. So these other Marines assumed I was somebody of some responsibility that they better listen to.
Uh-huh.
I had no rank. I mean, technically we were all privates.
Right.
We didn't have any private uniforms. We were just people.
Yeah.
So I've got to get these guys on a bus, get them to the airport, fly to Los Angeles, transfer planes, and fly them to San Diego, where we would be met by somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I didn't expect any problems until we got out off the airplane in LA into the terminal looking for the ride to San Diego. You ever hear of miniskirts?
Oh, yes. They were very popular back then.
Well, they just came out, and we had Hollywood starlets walking all over the place in miniskirts,
Oh, no.
legs up to their necks. And I'm telling you, the first thing I had to do was tell all these guys to roll their tongues back into their mouths and follow me to the airline.
Yeah.
And as quick as I could, I got them on the airliner before they could change their mind to go AWOL.
Mm-hmm.
So I got them all on the airplane. We flew to San Diego. And fortunately, I sat next to a PFC who had graduated, Marine Corps boot camp the year before.
Yeah.
So here's what you got to know. You never learned anything with your mouth open. So, pay attention. And he says, when they ask for volunteers, normally you would not do that. You
Right.
wouldn't volunteer for anything until they ask for somebody to be a milkman. That's the job you want. You
Okay.
want to be a milkman, trust me. So it turns out the milkman job wasn't until we had already been through several weeks of boot camp, and now it's our turn for KP in the mess hall.
Yeah.
We're going to get a whole week of KP just to teach us how to follow orders and do all our jobs together.
All right.
Who wants to drive a truck? Well, all the hands but mine and another. I told another guy, a friend of mine, we're going to wait until they need a milkman. All these guys wanted to drive a truck. Well, they all got hand trucks.
Yep.
And they spent all day in 90-degree and hotter weather hauling stuff in and out off of bigger trucks, real trucks. And I laughed the whole time. Dumbass. Anyway, so they asked for a milkman, and two of us raised our hands, and they wanted two guys, and we were it. Well, we got to work inside the reefer, which of course is cold,
Oh, yeah.
and it's for chilling the fruits and vegetables, ice cream, things like that. So you got your hands free to pick whatever you want, whenever you want it, as long as you don't get caught.
Right. And you're in the nice, cool cooler.
And everybody else is working in the heat.
Yeah.
The mess hall's not air conditioned. The kitchen's certainly not air conditioned. The outside isn't air conditioned, but in the reefer, it's cool and comfortable. So I did that for a week.
Uh-huh.
And usually we'd pretend to be busy in there counting things and making notes, and so they wouldn't get us for mop duty or anything else.
Yeah.
Most of the week we got away with it. Eventually somebody said, "What are you doing?" And we'd say, "Well, nothing really. Well, I'll get out here and do this." Anyway, so it was the best week I had in boot camp was mess hall. As a Marine, infantry in boot camp, I was the bottom of the pack. I was not an athlete. I couldn't run. The only guy I was faster than was the guy who was short legs and couldn't have kept up with anybody. I was always second from last.
As long as you can outrun that guy, though, right?
As long as I could outrun that guy, I was on my way. And we're scrambling over obstacles, and things were not looking real good for Private Don Roach.
Right.
I mean, I was destined to get the worst of the duty, whatever it was, until things changed. We got to where we had to climb ropes.
Mm-hmm.
They had, I don't know, 20, 30-foot ropes to climb. I learned to climb ropes in high school. I'd climb a rope like a monkey. So they got me standing there holding the rope. My squad leader's screaming at me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he knows what my performance has been so far. And he's screaming, "You better get up there. You get up there. I'm up this and that." And he's the same rank as I am, but he's the squad leader.
Right.
So he has authority.
Mm-hmm.
He can order me to get down and give him push-ups and things. I was already on the weak squad. We got up a half hour before or an hour before everybody and did PT, and we stayed up an hour later than everybody and did PT.
Yeah.
So for half my time in the Marine Corps, I'd been on the weak squad just because I didn't have the muscle ability of all these other guys. I could think.
Right.
I just couldn't coordinate stuff.
Right. They didn't really value that at that point, right?
Yeah.
They wanted you to be physical.
Oh, yeah, it's all physical. Yeah. So anyway, in the sergeant, the the DI
Mm-hmm.
yells, "Go!" Well, before he could blink, I was halfway up the rope. And I got up to the top, and I'm hanging over the top of this 30-foot tower, and I'm looking around. MCRD is in the center of the San Diego International Airport. You got runways on 3 sides.
Uh-huh.
I'm an airplane nut, an aviation nut. And for weeks, I've got DI staring me in the face. "Just let me see you blink. You better be not looking around." I was looking at every airplane that was flying.
Uh-huh.
I mean, there were some wonderful, modern business airplanes, things I had never seen live before. I'd only read about them in books. And turboprops were just coming out.
Yeah.
And there were twin engines and with big radial engines and turboprops and, well, jets, of course.
Uh-huh.
But I was more interested in the smaller aircraft. And they were going every which way all day long. And I was so happy to be there because the other boot camp was in Parris Island up in the, sticks
Yeah.
with the bugs and the insects and everything. I didn't want that. So I was literally a Hollywood Marine. I was happy where I was. Everything was clean and dry, and I liked the heat. Warmed up my aching shoulders.
There you go.
So anyway, and I had a way of beating the DI psychologically. They'd stare at me and yell, "Just let me see you blink." And I thought, bet you can't see my toes wiggling.
Yeah.
I mean, I was defiant. I mean, that's
Right.
we all were.
In your own way.
But in my own way, I was winning the war.
Yeah.
So anyway, I could climb ropes. So DI's made a note of that, like, oh my God, because not everybody in the platoon could climb a rope, much less get to the top and hang around and look around.
Right.
I had to be ordered down.
Yeah.
They weren't going to come up after me, but they could order me down. So I had to be ordered back down. That squad leader, he hung on the rope and cried like a baby.
Oh, no.
The DI finally told him, "Stand up and you'll be taller. You'll be higher on the rope standing up." I mean, because literally, he grabbed the rope and shrank.
Yeah.
And he didn't do anything. He just hung there. And, of course, I wasn't allowed to say a word. I wouldn't have wanted to anyway. I felt bad for him. And I expected the DIs, if I had been the DI, I would have said, "Roach, show the man how to climb a rope.
Yeah.
Teach him. Like, you're a Marine, teach another Marine." That's what we do. That's what we're supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they had drilled that into us. Say, if you can't, if we find a Marine that can't do something, show him how to do it. It's his job to learn,
Right.
but maybe he needs more personal instruction, So anyway, I never saw that guy again. Anyway, a couple of weeks later, we went to Camp Pendleton to go to the rifle range.
Mm-hmm.
So we were going to spend 2 weeks at Camp Pendleton. All counted as boot camp. So we were still drilled the same. We had to make our beds the same, But here we are in a modern facility with modern bunk bed, no Quonset huts. Everything was modern, air conditioned. And I was thrilled to be there at Edson Flats, they called it. So we spent the first week with our M14s snapping in. And they have an obelisk painted white with thousands of dots on it. Those are the bullseyes. And you spend all day pointing your weapon, going, click, 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 and you learn trigger control. You learn how to aim the weapon. Of course, at that point, nobody knows if you're aiming at the right dot or if you'd ever hit anything anyway. But these big, long M14s, heavy weapons, they were better than the M1s that used in World War II. But they were capable of either single or full automatic fire. They had a tremendous recoil. And so we did that for a week. Then the second week, we actually fired on the range.
Thank you for listening to part 1 of our 5-part series with Don Roach, who served in the United States Marine Corps. That's a wrap for this episode of the Veterans Archives podcast. We truly appreciate you taking the time to listen and honor the incredible stories of our nation's heroes. Don't forget, you can catch us every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern on Wreaths Across America Radio, or stream past episodes anytime on Buzzsprout, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and as I've said before, any place you can find a podcast, you can find the Veterans Archives podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share our content on YouTube and Facebook and TikTok and Instagram and across all social media. Every share helps us reach more people and preserve more stories. The Veterans Archives podcast is a nonprofit initiative, and our mission is simple: to give veterans a voice and ensure their stories are never forgotten. This service is completely free for veterans because their sacrifices deserve to be recognized and remembered. You want to help? Follow us, spread the word, and if you know a veteran with a story to tell, send them our way. Visit us at veteransarchives.org to learn more about how you can get involved. Thanks again for tuning in, and most importantly, thank you to all the veterans and their families for their service and sacrifice. Until next time, take care, and we will see you on the next episode of the Veterans Archives podcast.